Larry, welcome, man. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to share more about IoTeX and kind of our view of how the real world and Web3 merge throughout this podcast.
I'm really happy to have you, man. Like I have interviewed you before, and you were just great to talk with. Super interesting stuff. That IoTeX is one of those projects that has been out for a while, and that people got very excited about, and then kind of like it has died out of the mainstream, but that doesn't mean you haven't been producing amazing stuff. So, would you like to just give people a quick rundown of what IoTeX is, in case they lived below of a rock for the last couple of years?
Yeah, for sure. So IoTeX, we got started back in 2017. And at the core of what we are, we're a smart contract platform, layer one blockchain, EVM compatible, Web3 compatible, fast, cheap, decentralized, all of that. But what really differentiates IoTeX is we've always had a big focus on the Internet of Things, all these billions of devices that are around the world watching, listening, sensing what people and businesses do in the real world. And the goal of IoTeX from day one has been to use these devices to connect things that people or businesses do in the real world to token incentives in the Web3 space. So, I think back maybe 2 years, we really transitioned from being just a platform to now being a full ecosystem. We have dozens and dozens of decentralized applications building on top of IoTeX. We have great partners from the exchange side listed on Coinbase, Binance, Huobi, and also doing a lot of stuff on the enterprise side of things. So at the core of what that is, IoTeX, we're the IoT blockchain, and kind of just like you said, there's different things that interest people at different times in the blockchain space. DeFi summer to NFT 2021 to DAO 2021, and for us, it's never been a question of if; it's been it's a question of when, right? Without a doubt, we believe that machines are going to be the biggest users of blockchain in the next decade. So we've just been putting our heads down, building our own set of partners as well that are very unique to IoTeX, and it's going to start to pay off, and it already has. We're $1 billion project now, but we have much more to grow because the Internet of Things is estimated to be worth $12 trillion by 2030, and when you merge these multi-trillion-dollar industries between IoT and blockchain together, you capture even larger network effects, right? So at the core, that's what our belief and what we've been working on, and excited to share more throughout this podcast.
Like the whole point of blockchains is to like eliminate the need for humans in code, right? Like the need for humans, I mean, in systems. So you want to build systems that are basically running without any sort of input, without any human decision, that just go. And that's sort of like what Bitcoin has been good at doing, right? Like just being
100%.
itself, uh,
hmm
unfaced. So it's always cool to think in about that as a precursor to well, enabling machines to run on their own, to like not interact with humans. And you can get this topic there very fast, but we're not going
100%.
in that direction. uh, what are the I've read a lot of these about this in IoTex's materials, and I find it very cool, like the use cases that you envision for this, both in the short term and the longer term. can you can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, man. Like just to go very high level, and we'll start to break it down from there, right? You said something very interesting about blockchains kind of doing what they're told because it's open source and verifiable code, right? You can almost call it tamper-proof software in that respect. Once you combine tamper-proof software with tamper-proof hardware, meaning all of these machines or devices that also do what they're told, then you have a really amazing foundation for delivering incentives and for automation and a lot of other things, right? If you
Right on.
trust a machine that's doing something and it listens to its instructions from a smart contract that is also tamper proof, that's the design space that we're talking about, right? And we all know that Web3 is all about peer to peer and open incentives, right? There's always someone that's incentivizing someone else to do something that they wouldn't necessarily do on their own accord. This is at the layer one level where you have all these validators and delegates that are operating servers and running the protocol. They're not doing this for shits and giggles on the weekend. They are doing this because the protocol incentivizes them in an open way to provide this server infrastructure to the network, right? And once you go up another level at the application layer, this is where things really start to get interesting, right? We come from this era of DeFi and staking, where the incentive is to deposit your assets into a smart contract and you will earn yield in the form of cryptocurrency in a very transparent way, right? Amazing. DeFi 2020. Then now we're kind of in this era of this GameFi, where people are doing things by clicking buttons on their phone or their laptop, doing things in the digital world to earn digital assets and digital reputation. Again, in a very open and transparent way. And where we're evolving to next, and what IoTeX has been working on to enable, is let's do things in the real world to earn digital assets or digital reputation. And this is where devices and tamper proof devices specifically come into play, because devices are going to be the ones that prove that someone has done something in the real world, right? Whether it is run 5 miles or drive a specific route to work or turn off all of your lights when you're not in the house, or all of these things are things that devices can understand and inform a blockchain that something happened. And that's where people can start to earn incentives for doing things in the real world, right? Another way to look at this, I would say, is proof of anything, right? Proof of work and proof of stake are all these like buzzwords that are commonly understood as consensus mechanisms, but these are literally proofs that you provide to a blockchain in order to get some type of permission or some type of reward, right? You do the work, you prove your work to the Bitcoin blockchain, you get to mint the next block and you earn a Bitcoin reward. You prove to the Ethereum blockchain that you staked 32 ETH and you can become a validator and you can earn Ethereum rewards. Well, what if the proofs can be things that we do in the real world, right? Prove to me that you've reduced your blood pressure by X amount and you'll get an incentive for doing that. Prove to me that you've ran 3 miles every day for the past week with your healthcare wearable and you get some type of incentive from your insurance company. Even crazy ideas like prove to me that you slept 7 hours on a Sunday and maybe your employer will give you like a sleep to earn kind of concept, right? Your employer will pay you to wake up well rested on a Monday, and that could be an open and transparent incentive. And all of this in the future is going to be kind of zero knowledge, right? You don't have to expose all of this raw data about where you've been or what you've been doing. But as long as you can zero knowledge prove that to a smart contract, that's where the incentives can start to flow in. So it's really a mechanism to change people's behavior in the real world. And I think that's one of the hardest things in the world to do, is getting people to change who they are or what their habits are. But the best incentive to do that is a token that can mean money or voting rights or loyalty points. So this design space is just massive. And we've only talked about two verticals out of the many hundreds out there, like healthcare, automotive, and I guess geolocation, right? But there's agriculture, there's weather, there's smart city, smart home, aero, astro. There's so much stuff that uses devices. And we live in a world where it's hard to understand who to trust and why to trust. If we can have tamper-proof devices prove things about what we do, and tamper-proof smart contracts verify and deliver rewards based on that proof, then you start to understand like what size of opportunity we're talking about.
And since you're talking devices, I find this concept real fascinating that IoTeX sort of introduced to the world, the Internet of Trusted Things. So, how would you describe the Internet of Trusted Things?
Yeah, there's kind of two ways to think about blockchain and IoT, right? Not to give another like analogy, but I think these analogies are important, right? One of them is how blockchain is going to impact the traditional Internet of Things, right? And if you know anything about the IoT, which again is all these billions of devices out there, from vehicles to sensors to in the future autonomous drones and things like this, right? The Internet of Things is plagued by security, privacy, and interoperability issues. That's why your Google smart home device cannot talk to your Amazon smart home device, because they're owned by big tech companies that want to have full control, right? They're not going to be interoperable. They're not going to be user centric. They're not going to be private, right? So in the long run, blockchain has a real big opportunity to replace these cloud-based Web 2 systems with something that is fully user-centric and fully decentralized, right? But truthfully, that's going to be a long grind, right? I used to be a consultant back in the day, and a lot of my projects had to do with moving people from physical data centers to cloud systems. And that was at least a decades, maybe 2 decades long initiative. Same thing with removing these cloud systems and putting them in, replacing them with blockchains, right? A lot of scalability issues, a lot of things that have to be figured out with blockchains before it can power the entire world. But that's why IoTeX does a lot of standardization, a lot of research consortiums, and we are just on the pulse of everything going on with what does the future without cloud or blockchain complementing cloud look like. And that's what the Internet of Trusted Things looks like. If you can look at your IoT devices and say, without a shadow of a doubt, I trust that that device only works for me, and there's nothing going on in the background about selling my data or exposing what I've done or leaking this, leaking that, then that's going to be the Internet of Trusted Things, right? But the other way to look at blockchain is everything, or blockchain and IoT is everything I explained before. How can the Internet of Things, as it is today, which already consists of 25 plus billion devices, how can we use this as a new data source for our smart contracts? How can we use devices as proofs that we can submit to our smart contracts to power new types of incentives, right? Um, so both of those, I think, comprise the Internet of Trusted Things. If you can trust a device to say, hey, if I actually did something, you're going to tell the truth about what I did to the blockchain, and that's going to deliver me a reward without me needing to do anything extra. That's what trust means to me, right? You can trust the devices and the software that are powering your life.
And before, like, diving into dumb devices and that kind of thing, I think what's kind of really interesting is how the existing legacy world, but also like the new Web3 world, can just start implementing these kind of solutions. Because you see, like, let's take the example of proof of workout, which is like a relatively easy one that you mentioned. um,
Hmm.
Proof of workout basically could be used by Nike, call it that, or Adidas or whatever, to deliver you rewards for working out. And therefore, like, that's not like them giving away free money. Like, that's not how people should think about that. But you should
Hmm.
think that they're also, for example, running marketing campaigns and spending a lot of money in marketing. So why
Hmm.
not give that money directly to the users? That's a bit of a
Exactly.
paradigm change that blockchains facilitate, and that we do not yet have a way to completely do in the real world. I mean, they
Yeah.
can give away like vouchers and discounts and whatever, but like, people in the end just feel like scammed by those, right? Like, oh, you're giving me a voucher so I can go buy more of your own products. But if
Yeah.
you're actually getting like money that you can use for whatever, then yeah, that's a paradigm change.
It's a really interesting concept that you mentioned because you're talking about like reforming advertising and the way that big tech companies make money today. It's all advertising based, right? Like the way that the world works in Web 2 is you have all these amazing free services that we use on a daily basis from, Instagram to Facebook to Spotify to blah, 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 right? Um, and it's almost an incentive structure in itself that big tech companies are incentivizing you to give up your data for this free service. And to date, I would call that a fair trade. You know what I mean? Until there was an alternative that you can have the best of both worlds, where you can have a service and not feel like you're being ripped off, right? But what we're talking about in the advertising space is really interesting, right? Rather than having these big tech companies form digital profiles about us by assuming things, right? Like, hey, because you watched this video, I'm going to assume that you're interested in X. Just because you purchased this product, then I'm going to assume you're interested in that, right? Or just because you did anything in this world, there's a lot of assumptions and like data science and machine learning on our data to form these digital profiles, right? What
And
Web
billions of
three
dollars go into developing those assumptions, basically.
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's their entire business, right? They form these digital profiles. They offer the opportunity for other companies to advertise to you based on their assumptions of who you are. And these are $1 trillion businesses, right? It's crazy to think about, but that's just the way the world works, right? So what are we going to do about it? Rather than, are we trying to fix the old system, or are you trying to create the new system, right? And I think the new system is much more attractive and interesting, where rather than, people assuming who you are, you can prove to people who you are based on the activity of your blockchain wallet, right? From, there's a really popular thing in the DeFi space that I always use it as an example. It's called the degen score. I'm not sure if you remember that, but it basically scans your blockchain address and sees what yield farms you have interacted with. And the crazier, degenerate yield farms, the more that you interact with, the higher your degen score is, right? And some big crypto VCs have used that as a way to hire people because the proof is there. You have interacted with these contracts, which means you have gone into the deep end of DeFi and really experimented, or you're just a true degen, right? But what's really interesting is, yes, you can know what addresses you've interacted with, what contracts you've interacted with, but once you start to put together some real world proofs about, hey, using my geolocation that's tied to my blockchain address, I can prove to you that I've been to these specific locations. Maybe one of them is a camping site, maybe several of them are camping sites. Then that really flips advertising on its head completely, where if someone wants to advertise directly peer to peer that their camping tent is on sale, they can scan the blockchain, understand, okay, who has done what, and in a completely pseudonymous fashion be like, hey, here's my offer. Not because you are, your name is this, your age is this, your sex is this, your sexual preference is this, but because I don't need to know any of that. I just need to know that you have done this activity that I want to advertise to, right? So throw out the digital profiles and create your own identity, right? And I think that's just a really interesting concept, that, decentralized identities and your ability to control them and use them without intermediaries that need to assume stuff. Huge use case for sure.
And is I mean, you were going to go to Web3 before I interrupted you, so I just
Mhm.
want to make sure you covered everything you wanted to say about the Web3 and these kind of models that are stepping aside from data collecting. Is that was that where you were trying to get to?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people ask us about use cases in the IoT space, right? Or the blockchain and IoT space specifically. I think that, like, there's a lot of examples out there. There's one popular one called Helium, right? Everyone knows Helium. Really amazing project. We have a lot of respect for what they've done. They basically have proven that you can use tokenomics and bootstrapping incentives to put 500,000 devices around the world, right? It's questionable whether there's a fit of like the supply of connectivity with the demand for that connectivity, but they've proven that you can use token-based incentives to put, bootstrap these machine networks that historically are very capital intensive to start, right? The difference between Helium and what we're trying to do, think of us as almost like a Helium factory, right? Um, Helium has one, their connectivity is the utility, right? But that's a very single utility. You use it to connect to the internet. There's not really multiple ways that you can utilize connectivity. But when we talk about data and IoT data, a lot of people assume that we're just working on data marketplaces where we want to sell this data outright. But that's not really the progression that this is going to take. Where it's really going to start is using your data as proof of things that you've done in the real world to trigger token incentives, right? So if I prove to you, again, that I've ran 5 miles, then I can get a token for that. And I can use this token to maybe get discounts on vitamins or supplements or things like that, right? In the long run, yes, I can sell my data outright, but I need to have that as a statistically significant amount of data. But the real long term opportunity that we're talking about with Web3 is if we if we have like thousands of users putting all of their data together, and then we run machine learning and AI over it to extract insights that are sellable not just raw data that has a bunch of dummy stuff in it, but the insight is what people want and pay for, then you can flow those proceeds back to the users. The protocol can keep some of the proceeds, and that's the win-win scenario, right? Um, but all these machine networks, really, they're buying a window of awareness. They have these really crazy bootstrapping incentives, and over time, they will have and have and have until you reach some type of equilibrium point. And that's the opportunity to figure out, okay, what are we doing with all this data? How do we, actually make use of it, and how do we find more utility for it, right? So that's really the challenge with these blockchain IoT networks. But in the healthcare space, in the automotive space, anything that's more like insurance based, the utility and the demand is very much there, right? Because data is scarce, especially user data. And if you're able to annotate that with the fact that you've done other things, that's where the network effects truly come into play.
Yeah. So in my mind, this is a question I find myself asking myself a lot more these days. Because see, I back in 2017, basically, like the question that everyone was trying to answer, both for themselves and to justify their existence, was why does this deserve to be on the blockchain? Now, on your case, that's completely logic, and completely anyone can see it. Basically, anyone can see why this needs to be on the blockchain. But a question I find myself asking much more these days is why does this need to be its own blockchain? Because we're seeing so many layer ones coming up. I mean, yours was there before, a long time before many of these, but we're seeing so many layer ones, Ethereum killers. Just
Hmm.
everyone wants to be like the next hot layer one, and I'm just yeah, I just would like to hear your answer. Well, why
Yeah.
does IoTeX deserve to have its own blockchain?
That's a really interesting question, and I think you also bring up a really interesting point that there's a brand new influx of new layer ones being launched. Like there was a kind of a gap in between like 2019 to 2021. You didn't really see too many new layer ones having the balls to like launch something when there's so many competitors in the space already. But the thing about these new layer ones is that they also pair very seamlessly with layer two protocols that they also create. So it's more full stack in that sense, right? Some of them are layer ones with zero knowledge proof kind of capabilities. Some of them are layer ones with built-in like auto like scalability features and things like that. So you're starting to see people expand from just the Ethereum killer base layer one, and everyone's given up on sharding. I haven't seen any like real advancements in that. So that's really where the layer one plus layer two thing comes into play. And when you think about what IoTeX did in 2017 when we started, we were the OGs of this concept because we've always paired our layer one, built completely from scratch, by the way, with the layer two protocols that are very IoT oriented, right? Not everything is going to be done on layer one. Specifically, the layer two protocols that we have that are very important are device identity. So you can understand what this device is before you accept data from it, and device oracles, which can translate what a device says into something that a blockchain can understand, right? So those layer two protocols that make us very unique pair very seamlessly with our layer one. And we designed the layer one to be fast enough to support these Internet of Things use cases, right? So now in this layer one landscape, you have kind of Ethereum and those that are kind of trying to be general purpose like Ethereum, like you have the Nears, the Harmonies, the Avalanches. You wouldn't necessarily call them like use case specific. They do GameFi, they do DeFi, but now you're seeing some that are privacy focused layer ones. You have IoT focused layer ones, like IoTeX has always been. You have maybe even vertical specific layer ones that are going to combine a lot of custom layer two protocols that pair better with their custom layer one, right? So it's really starting to be more use case specific or yeah, use case specific, I would say. So it's interesting, building a layer one is really hard, man. So we'll see how all these newcomers evolve. And there's a lot of templates out there to copy paste. But it's not like a D app where you can just grab the code, put a new front end on it, and call it something different. Like building a new layer one that's actually competitive to everything out there today requires some level of expertise that's above and beyond the thousands of people that have been slaving away at the layer one design over the past 5, 10 years, right? So some of them are money grabs. Some of them are actually coming out of places like Jump Crypto and like people that really know what they're doing. But how much more evolution is there in the layer one landscape? We'll see. But I think the pairing of layer twos to layer ones in a full stack capacity, that's a direction that's, yeah, IoTeX has always believed in. And I think we'll see some interesting new platforms coming out soon.
Which is why you also see so many uh, layer ones just not pick up speed, because like nowadays you don't get the chance to bootstrap a layer one like Bitcoin and Ethereum did, or like Monero did, and a bunch of others. Like you don't get to see that or that level of organic growth from the very bottom, because everyone's in a rush. Basically, everyone's like raising VC money in order to compete and to scale faster. And there's all this pressure, and then there's all these. There's actual competition that you have to keep up with. So if you want to compete with Ethereum, you not only do you have to process a lot of transactions very fast, but you also have to like be very protect your users against like the network stopping. You have to make sure the consensus is safe. You don't want to have hard forkings. You don't want to have like there's a whole lot of things that you want to prevent, and that's super
Yeah.
hard. And how's that process been for IoTeX, for like having been a layer one for so long, and one that, like you say, was designed from scratch and not meant to just be X but better?
Yeah. I think that it's interesting to think about the journey that we've taken because, like you said, maybe people haven't heard about IoTeX. And it's weird to say this, but maybe that's a little bit by design as well, right? Like, we've never been the project that wants to hype things in a way that's untruthful, right? When we have something amazing to hype up, like we just started an IEEE standard with Bosch, Lenovo, Ericsson, Lockheed Martin, massive enterprises, of course we're going to yell that. But thinking back from like the 2018, 2019 days when it was all white papers and shouting contests, literally, we didn't play that game, right? And maybe, we didn't even do an ICO. We did a private sale to accredited investors. And maybe it's belief in what we've been building. But, I after all the dust has settled and thinking about where we are today, like there's some layer ones out there that think very short term, right? Hey, let's give out $300 million in incentives. What do you think is going to happen, right? People are going to use your platform until those incentives run out, and then they're going to go back to Ethereum, right? There's a lot of bounty hunters and whale hunters out there that, yes, you can boost your metrics in a non organic way, but really building community that believes in you for the long term. And, IoTeX has always been non competitive with other chains because we're doing our own thing, right? No one's gonna, you know, even if someone claims that they're the blockchain and IoT leader, no, the proof is in the pudding. We have all the dApps that are building IoT stuff, building on IoTeX, and that is through a very organic and long-term view type of thing, right? We're actually raising a round right now, an equity round for what we call MachineFi Lab, and you'll see exactly the massive IoT enterprises that we brought on board as investors. And that's not through giving out incentives or free money like these other layer ones are doing. It's through, you know, really building tech that makes a lot of sense to facilitate all these things that we talk about, right? So we don't like to talk bad about any projects out there. There's some that, of course, overdo it. But look, sometimes giving out incentives to your users buys you a window of awareness, right? But if you don't convert that window of awareness into something that's long lasting, then you're going to die as a project, right? And we haven't really done anything huge in that respect because I think IoTeX, we still maybe have like 3 to 6 months to really onboard like a few examples in other key verticals. But once that happens and we're ready to really showcase all of these apps across healthcare, across automotive, across supply chain, across green energy, across geolocation, all of these things are very much in the works and not by us, by third party builders. So that's the best part, right? I think eventually we will, play that layer one game just to have our hello world moment. But if you do it too early and you can't convert that into something that's meaningful, then what are you really doing? That's my perspective on it.
And I think you're very right. Like there's there are games that you don't want to play. There's definitely um, places in which even if you win, you're not getting. Well, that's a phrase like that. That's a catchphrase. You play stupid
Hmm.
games, you win stupid prizes, and that's
Yeah,
pretty much what happens with this kind of thing. Um,
yeah.
you also touched upon Helium, which I would say like it's the biggest name in blockchain IoT stuff out there right now, along with
Hmm.
you guys. So, what else are you guys seeing that it's being solved using IoT and blockchain together? And what do you think are like the opportunities, or where is IoTeX just trying to shine right now? That would be like the low hanging fruit of the space.
Yeah, so Helium, very interesting project, right? They started by incentivizing people to set up these hotspots that emit a certain type of connectivity called LoRa, low power, long range connectivity. Very low bandwidth, but very large range, right? Over 2 kilometers radius of range for every hotspot. And it's used by different types of small sensors, right? Like parking meters and a lot of smart city stuff. And Helium, I think they'll admit this themselves, is that the LoRa part of their business is not really scaling that the way they envision it because everyday consumers don't use LoRa connectivity. Most people have never even heard of it, right? It's something that's very smart city focused. So rather than
Which I'm
the
actually in that group. What would you like to
yeah,
describe that quickly? Because yeah, I don't know enough about helium to like know what LoRa is.
yeah, LoRa, again, is just a connectivity standard similar to, there's a lot of different ways to connect to the internet, right? Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 4G, LoRa, Sigfox. These are all different types of connectivities that have different ranges, different pricing, and different
Okay.
bandwidth, meaning how much data you can push through, right? So if what Helium did very well is they took a B2B2C approach with their hotspots, right? They incentivized everyday people to set up these hotspots. And the problem was the demand side was not really consumer facing. The demand side is very business facing, right? So even they will admit they have a huge gap in the supply of connectivity versus the demand for this connectivity because LoRa is not really used by that many people, and even countries like Korea have free nationwide LoRa, so why pay for it, right? But they've made a very smart decision to pivot over to 5G, which is something that we've all been in a really crappy cell service area, and if you had the ability to tap into a 5G hotspot that's going to give you 1 gigabyte download speeds, then I would pay for that, right? So I think that's a very interesting pivot or model, but they're also, I think, expanding outside of connectivity, and rightfully so, right? They've raised a lot of money to do so, but that's the reason why connectivity, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is a single utility, right? You use connectivity to connect to the internet, and that's it, right? There's not really much else you can do with it. But when you think about all the other types of devices in the world, right? There's billions and billions of devices that are used in every aspect of our personal and professional lives, right? Um, I think the biggest opportunities right now are in healthcare, right? Healthcare, there's a lot of different types of devices that will measure things about your body, right? From wellness to medical to genomic. Wellness is like your how many steps you've taken, how many calories you've burned, what's your heart rate, how
What's your
much you've
sleep right?
slept, right? And these kind of things are perfect inputs to a smart contract to incentivize you to be healthier, right? On a more serious front, your medical data, meaning like your blood pressure, your blood sugar, these types of things can also be incentivized. But no one has not many people have blood pressure and like blood sugar monitors in their homes. So that's more of like again a clinic kind of thing. And then finally, you have another type of health data, which is genomic, meaning 23andMe. You spit in a cup, they will sequence your genome, and they will tell you what vitamins you're deficient in, where your ancestors came from, and all this stuff. But the real power that we're talking about with IoTeX, just within the healthcare vertical, is when you combine wellness and medical and genomic together into your digital health profile, and you start to incentivize not just your daily activities, but also your maybe your monthly or your quarterly medical check-ins, and also how that affects your genome and what like things you can improve there, then insurance companies are going to be licking their chops over this, right? Same thing with automotive, right? Right now in the States, for example, everyone's familiar with all these commercials that say, hey, you don't get in an accident for a year, your your insurance rate's going to go down, right? Discount double checks, safe drivers checks, they're all over the place, right? But just because you don't get in an accident every year doesn't mean you're a good driver, right? Maybe you're such a shitty driver that no one wants to drive next to you. So what we
Right.
have the ability to do with blockchain and IoT is if we can start to grab data from their vehicle directly, there's 20 plus electronic control units in your car that can tell things like, is your seatbelt on? How fast you're going? How hard you turn the steering wheel? And you pair that with a dash cam that's facing outside and inside to say your eyes are on the road X% of the time. And if you get in an accident, then you have all this video data, right? These are all inputs into automotive insurance smart contracts where you can start to be very granular with the things you're incentivizing, right? Like I'm incentivizing you to, I'm going to give you a token every ride you take that your seatbelt is on, you have both hands on the wheel, right? I drive with one hand on the wheel. But if I was incentivized to put two, then I would do that, right? So these are kind of the frameworks. And again, we're just talking about two verticals, healthcare, automotive. Once you start to think about everything else that uses a device out there, um, this is kind of like the proof of something with a device. But there's a lot of other devices that are just gathering very valuable information, right? Even device as a service. Hey, I live next to the beach, and if you want to tap into my surf cam, then you can pay a small token to do that. That's like a blockchain and IoT use case as well. Or hey, I have the data from my community of people, and I want to sell that to an insurance company or to someone else that needs this data, or a real estate company that wants to understand how much foot traffic there is. Then we start to get into like a whole other slew of use cases, right? So, um, yeah, we could talk for days about all the different verticals that use IoT, but I think just look outside and pay attention to all of the devices that you interact with on a daily basis and just understand like what does that device know about me? And in the future, if I can use this device to prove things about what I do, this is all going to become a reality very soon, right? So it's just interesting to think about.
And another thing that you guys have covered, it's the impression and no, the distinction between dumb devices versus smart devices. And
Hmm.
I know that's a topic that interests a lot of people. Um, yeah, I just want to give you a free floor to talk about dumb devices, basically.
Yeah, I think there's not all devices are created equal, right? There is a reason why you trust your iPhone or your mobile phone to use your biometrics as a login, right? Your Face ID or your fingerprint scan as a login mechanism to your phone, right? It's because you trust this device because it has extra security features built into it, right? Would you trust some device that you bought for $20 to manage your Face ID or your Retina scan? Definitely not, because
No
you
way.
probably are sure that that thing would not have the security features to protect it, right? So there is a special kind of chip out there. It's called secure hardware, right? It's a chip in your phone that does your biometrics and your Face ID. It's a chip in your Ledger hardware wallet that protects your private keys. And it's a chip on your credit card that manages your spending credentials or protects your spending credentials, right? And all of these chips are expensive, but they're getting cheaper by the day. So they're being put into more and more devices. It used to be only like the mission critical devices that, Tesla has some of the most high quality secure hardware built into their vehicles. Because if you're able to hack the car, then you're going to die, right? So, but now in all sorts of devices, people are using these secure chips. And one thing that these secure chips can do is sign data that it observes, and before you submit that to the blockchain, right? So that's where things become very interesting, is when you combine, again, tamper-proof hardware with tamper-proof software, right? But even if it's not tamper-proof hardware, it doesn't mean that you can't use it on blockchain, because there's a lot of software-based authentication stuff as well, right? Like, we get this question a lot. There's a lot of applications building on IoTeX right now that use data from your Apple Health app, right? Your Apple Health app tells you your heart rate, how well you slept, all these things. But there's also a lot of ways to fake that information, right? The number of steps that you take, I can grab my phone, I can shake it, I just took 30 steps, right, while sitting in place. So
Right.
it's not really about like it security is always in layers, right? You have to have multiple layers of security to make sure something's trusted, which is why two-factor authentication and now multi-factor authentication works, right? Your password is supposed to be very secure, but if it happens not to be, then you need your cell phone. And if that's not secure, maybe you have a UB key that will provide the third factor of authentication, right? Same thing with a lot of these um, a lot of these Oracle networks, right? Putting data onto a blockchain is very important to know that that data is trustworthy before you use it to trigger a financial incentive. Else, it becomes a scammer's honeypot, right? But it's a combination of hardware and software, right? We happen to focus a lot on the hardware side because that's where a lot of the data will originate, right? But you also can't discount the need for multiple layers of secondary and tertiary proof, to protect that data, right? So, um, yeah, not all devices are created equal. That's why I think a lot of people don't use um, like hardware wallets that aren't Ledger. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to think about that too.
I think also, yeah. I mean, we're getting at something very important, which is like the distinction between different devices. And I think that's a topic in and of itself. I mean, if we had 2 hours here, maybe we could get into that. But I'm trying to cover like some points that I think are very nuanced and very interesting about how IoTeX can grow. And in a way, your growth is unfortunately tied to the growth of the blockchain industry as a whole, right? Like,
Hmm.
people are only going to be drawn to incorporating blockchain into their devices as much as they see a potential for blockchains to stay around for basically an indefinite amount of time. Now, I think we're just crossing that curve. We're just getting to the point where people are accepting that blockchains are going to be a part of everyday life, basically forever. uh, or, or we're getting there very soon, rather. um, but before that actually used to be like a big incognita, and so you relied a lot on like the success of Ethereum, the emergence of DeFi, I mean the emergence of general use cases for these technologies that people could adopt and would actually be successful. And you would now say like the money aspect didn't really pan out that well when it came out to like the success of blockchains. But smart contracts did, DeFi did, NFTs are doing that, DAOs are doing that. So they're actually successful points. So what's your process like when you're trying to bring in partners to the IoT ecosystem, and when you're trying to convince people that exist outside of the blockchain world to jump into this? Because I reckon that's part of IoTex's ethos and mindset, to be to be a driver of bridging the non-blockchain world with the blockchain world.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, man. I think like, for my opinion, anyone that's interested in decentralization and also interested in finance, collectibles, decentralized organizations, etc., like every other use case, I think they're all in blockchain already, right? Whether they're an investor or a user, it's piqued the interest of everyone that it could to this point. And that's why I think IoTeX is a huge opportunity, right? There's a lot of people that don't give a shit about those categories that I mentioned. But if you tell people, hey, you can do things in the real world, be healthier, and earn money for doing it, that's going to bring in the next big wave of users, right? That don't want to do anything in the digital world. They just want to, do things in the real world, right? Um, but I think everything that has become a trend in blockchain always starts as a massive hype cycle and then will die down, right? Like blockchain itself, the concept of an ICO back in 2017, you can look at the chart, boom, and then it will wither down, right? Same thing with DeFi summer, right? Boom, withers down. NFTs, everyone had their own 10,000 profile picture collection. And now I honestly can't stand to see another one, right? But
Another
what
board ape.
after the dust settles, then you still remember, okay, like even though this was massively overhyped and people took a great idea and forked it into something that started not to really make sense or just overdid it a little bit, it doesn't detract from the fact that, the original thing that started that wave was very important and is now forever part of the blockchain ethos, right? Like DAOs, I think, is a huge example of this, man, because like when DAOs came out, you have like these people that don't know nothing about blockchain, like going all in on DAOs. And now the DAO ecosystem, they're not decentralized, they're not autonomous, they're just organizations. They're just Discord channels fronted on as DAOs, right? But there are the OG DAOs that have done the same. They've done real work in that respect. It just so happens that the noise is always from people that again need a shout in order to get attention and in hype, right? Some of them are not scams. Some of them are like well-meaning folks, but you know that's the same thing that comes with every new trend in technology, I would say, is you have a good idea and then people will jump on it and try to copy that idea until it doesn't really look so much like the original idea anymore, right? Um, but the category creator is always the one that will have the lion's share of the market, right? Uniswap for DEXs, um, CryptoPunks and Bored Apes for NFTs, right? Um, and when we start to think about the blockchain and IoT space, once IoTeX is launching these projects, I think there's going to be a lot of copycats out there that want to do the things that are the people that are building on our platform are doing, but it's there's always going to be a market share. There's going to be a first, right? I think there's going to be a lot of competitors that are going to be in the blockchain and IoT space in the future, but we've been working on this for 5 years, so it's not really a concern to us that people are trying to mimic what we're doing because they think it's a good idea. It's almost a sign of, stamp of approval kind of thing, right? There was a really interesting example that I was given regarding this category creation kind of thing. Noise canceling headphones. Do you know who the company that invented noise canceling headphones was? They actually coined the
I
term.
got I got no clue.
It's Bose, right? Bose invented the concept of noise canceling headphones, and this is why they still have the largest market share in that. It's not that Beats or Bowers and Wilkins or any of these like other high tech companies. Like same thing with Tesla and EVs, right? Everyone's now going EVs by 2025 or 2030. Are they really going to capture Tesla's market share? Yes, a little bit, but they created the category, they had the head start, and there's no way Tesla's going to go away. Do you know what I mean? In fact, they'll probably service all the other car companies that are coming out. So, um, yeah, I think that's just the way that technology happens to trend, right? There's a good idea, people copy it, but the person that invented it is really the one that will have the staying power. So, not to say we invented, there was other people that had the idea, but I think we're first to market with a lot of these things that we've been talking about for many years. So.
And when you try and bring yeah, partners outside the blockchain world into blockchain, I think that name will also go a long way, right? Eventually.
Yeah, yeah, it's proven too because um, I wish I could share some of these investors that we have coming on board. IoTeX, we haven't fundraised since 2018 when we did our private token sale, but now just like a lot of these other layer ones are doing, they are setting up these mega rounds led by A16Z and Sequoia and all these people. We, for this like pre mega round of ours, we decided to focus almost exclusively on venture arms of IoT enterprises. And
And actually,
you just,
that
yeah.
reminds me. That reminds me of a segue that I wanted to take here,
Hmm.
because when you mentioned ICOs died down, and just to add to the point that you were trying to make there, ultimately, that that these inventions and these innovations, they didn't go away, they just took up, they just took a different shape. Well, ICOs
Hmm.
didn't go anywhere. Like, you see people, you think just because you don't see as many ICOs in like the exact same way that you used to see them, they went away. But actually, what ICOs did is that they created a huge market, and they proved that there was so much money to be made with
Yeah.
crypto funding, that it's just now all taken by VCs, and it's just now professionalized. So nowadays you don't get 20,000 normies like you and me investing in regular projects over the internet through an ICO. No, you get a VC fund doing that for you, and
Yeah. Or even
so
like,
projects are a lot more
you
incentivized
know,
to go to them.
yeah, the concept of like a token generation event, right, is started by, hey, let's start by selling 1/4% or a quarter of the total supply, right? Um, but now you have a lot of projects realizing that, like, look, if you sell 20% of your token supply to pre-seed investors that are going to dump it when it's unlocked, then that's a red flag. People will start to understand that now, right? And that's why a lot of projects are doing fair launch, right? There's no VC allocation, there's a minimal team allocation. All of it is going to the community, especially the early adopters. This is like the brand new way to launch token networks. And, it was different back in 2017. Like everyone was doing mad scrambles to raise funding and everyone was making a lot of money and everyone lost a lot of money. We all know that kind of saga, right? But that's how things evolve from there, right? The concept of like an ICO, a public ICO that anyone could participate in, was massively disruptive to VC, and I think changed the face of VC forever. And now you have, regulations that are, in the United States that you can raise $5 million in crowdfunding from non-accredited investors. I would say that's directly due to the fact that ICOs were very popular, right? And if they didn't allow normal companies to do that, then everyone would go launch a crypto project, right? So it's fascinating to think about like how Web 2 companies or traditional regulators even like adopt similar principles or concepts as Web 3 has been pushing, but slowly but surely integrating into the previous way we used to do things, right? Metaverse is another amazing example, right? Without a doubt, we're going to have a centralized metaverse before there's a fully decentralized metaverse, but people are going to learn eventually that wait, whenever there's a readjustment of whatever like metaverse points, think about like all those airline and loyalty programs you're a part of. I get an email like every 1 to 2 years that, hey, sorry, your points have been devalued, right? Then when that happens in the metaverse, when your dollars experience inflation in a way that's not open and transparent, that's going to be the shifting point. Be like, fuck the metaverse. I'm going over to the decentralized version of that, even if the user experience is a little worse because it's harder to do this on distributed systems. But um, again, very hard to change people's behavior. But just in the past decade, like I always think about this, right? Like Spotify and Uber and all these things that we are verbs now didn't exist, right? So if we're able to change behavior from not listening to CDs and not using taxis to doing all this stuff virtually on your phone, I think the pace of change in the next 10 years is going to be exponentially larger, right? Um, which is why I think people heavily discount the impact of Web3 and what it's going to have. Yes, maybe not today, maybe not to the layman person, but it's just a better way that things work. You know what I mean? Everyone can admit
Yeah.
that. So interesting to think about for sure.
And I mean, we're talking about my metaverse migrations. When I think that's something that's gonna happen a lot faster. I think people are going to start shifting networks a lot faster, because nowadays, like, the biggest threat to like never having a decentralized YouTube is basically that people don't want to leave existing YouTube because that's where all the watchers are. But I
Hmm.
think that that's gonna start happening a lot faster, and we're gonna see people jumping platforms a lot faster. We already kind of seeing it with YouTube and Twitch. Like a lot of people are just like leaving YouTube to go to Twitch, and
Hmm.
I think that cycle, just like innovation cycles are getting faster, people just shifting platforms are gonna get a lot faster, and people are just gonna start chasing whatever's better. And
Hmm.
of course, like you said, if incentives are in line, because that's what it's all about, right? People don't have an incentive to shift from YouTube because you don't have the incentive elsewhere. You hope that the incentive will be built once everyone's jumped out of the ship, but you don't want to be the
Hmm.
first one doing it. Um,
Yeah.
man, this is a conversation that has a lot of like yeah caveats, and that which we can pretty much get going forever. But I
Yeah.
think it's a good point to start wrapping up. So, is there anything that we didn't touch on here that you would have liked to talk about, or something that you would like to say for people that are watching this that we haven't covered?
Yeah, man, it's tricky to wrap it all even into like 1 hour. Like what IoTeX is doing. We talked very conceptually about like our vision and why our vision matters today, but like just encourage people to go download our wallet. We just launched a brand new multi-chain wallet. Actually supports IoTeX, Ethereum, BSC, and Polygon, and even more EVM compatible chains in the future. Jump on there, explore like the 100 D apps that are live on IoTeX right now. It's a mix of DeFi, GameFi, and what we call MachineFi, right? MachineFi is our baby that we're kind of just really bringing to life. But it's also important to note that IoTeX, we do incubate a lot of projects. We are like infrastructure, but we have a lot of people just building on IoTeX without our help anymore. And that I think is like the sign of a very healthy ecosystem, right? Where before we had to incentivize people to build on IoTeX. Here's a huge grant, and build on us instead of Polygon, or build on us instead of Near. But they always end up going to all of these chains anyways, right? But what's becoming very clear is there are use cases that people want to build that can only be built on IoTeX, and that's where our IoT specific technology comes into play, right? If you want to do some serious use cases, the things that we're talking about here, you know, doing the basic cookie cutter stuff is not enough, right? You really have to integrate your devices to the blockchain. That stuff is really, really hard to do from scratch. So if someone wanted to build IoTeX capabilities on Ethereum, it's not like you can just do that tomorrow, right? So we really have built a nice moat, and a lot of amazing D apps, especially in the healthcare space, are coming out soon. I would say they look like Stepin, but better because they're not just counting steps. They're incentivizing you to increase your heart rate above a certain amount to get incentives, or to sleep better to get incentives. So it's really the evolution of a lot of these concepts that are very popular. But um, yeah, check us out. I wouldn't say anything more than that. IoTeX.io is our website. Join our Telegram, join our Discord channels, and follow us on Twitter. But most importantly, check out the projects that are building on IoTeX. I think you'll be very surprised with where Web3 is heading, especially in this kind of real world capacity. So,
And if you want to sort of like get the alpha, I'd really recommend following IoTeX, because like that they're always pushing out something that you didn't expect. So it's
yeah,
always very cool to see what they come up with next.
no
Highly
breaking
recommend from my
announcements on no breaking announcements on this podcast, but you know, watch our Twitter over the next couple months. We have a lot of big things that we're ready to push soon. So I'll leave it at
and
that.
well, thank you very much for coming, Larry. Man, like always welcome back.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it. And yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it again soon once we have those bigger announcements coming out to really shed some light on the next evolution of IoTech. So yeah.
That'd be great to cover. And well, to everyone that just heard that, well, stay tuned to this podcast as well, because there are things coming. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.